There's this moment, and you've had it, I've had it, everyone who's ever bought anything on a vibe has had it, where you're about to make a purchase, and something in the back of your head whispers, is this a need, or is this a decision you're going to have to explain later? For me, it was the Dyson hairdryer. I remember standing at Macy's like I was making a geopolitical decision. It wasn't a hair tool, it was foreign policy. My GDP, negative. My inflation, high. My confidence, fragile at best. But in that moment, I was convinced this was going to solve everything. My split ends, my self-esteem, global poverty, who knows? It was basically the Federal Reserve, except worse because I had a coupon. And that moment, that magical, delusional moment, where you truly believe you're playing 4D chess with your finances, that's exactly where our story begins today. Except, instead of a $400 hairdryer, people were blowing their fortunes on tulips. Yes, tulips. Flowers. Pretty, but let's be honest, a strong wind and they're basically salad. But in 1630s Holland, these weren't just flowers. These were status symbols. The iPhone launch line. The whatever thing you bought at 3 a.m. during a mental health dip that arrived at your doorstep and made you question every decision you've ever made. And people weren't just buying tulips. They were trading futures contracts for tulips. They were flipping tulips. They were taking out literal loans to buy a flower that, best case, was going to die faster than your motivation on the treadmill. This is the moment in history when an entire country collectively said, let's invest in perishable decor. And here's the twist. It didn't start with greed. It started with fear. Fear of missing out. Fear of being left behind. Fear of not having the thing everyone else had. Sound familiar? Because humans have been doing this forever. From Dutch tulips to tech stocks to the person on TikTok telling you that your avocado toast is why you can't buy a house. It's all the same pattern. A little desire, a little insecurity, a little delusion, and suddenly the market is hotter than my Dyson attachment on the high setting. So let's walk into the streets of Amsterdam, circa 1636. The air smells like herring, beer, and bad financial decisions. Merchants are shouting, ships are unloading spices, silks, and occasionally someone's dreams. And somewhere in all this chaos is a tulip bulb worth more than a house. Literally, more than a house. And the worst part, the people buying them were convinced they were being smart. Because in every bubble, every single one, the people in it truly believe they've discovered something the rest of us just don't understand. They think they're innovators, disruptors, early adopters, girl bosses of the 1600s. But all they've really discovered is the economic equivalent to lighting money on fire. But with florals. This is Tulip Mania. Not the myth, not the simplified version you learned in school. And not the, haha, people used to be so dumb version economists like to tell at parties to feel superior. This is the real story, the human story. The story of how ordinary people became extraordinary fools, and how, when we're not careful, we do it every single day. Act 2. How a flower became a flex. So let's talk about the mechanics. How a perfectly innocent flower turned into what the 17th century equivalent of if a luxury watch and a Tesla and a crypto coin had a baby. And to understand that, we have to start with something surprising. Tulip Mania didn't begin as a bubble. It began as science. I know, trust me, I was disappointed too. Back in the 1600s, people were obsessed with collecting things. Exotic birds, rare shells, fancy fabrics, diseases, unfortunately. There was no Netflix, hot yoga, no that girl routines. You entertained yourself by looking at objects and trying not to die. Enter the tulip. The tulip wasn't native to Holland. It arrived from the Ottoman Empire, a place so far away and fabulously wealthy that Europeans basically saw it as the Kardashian of empires. So when these bright, rich, exotic tulips started showing up in Dutch botanical gardens, People lost their minds. They'd never seen anything like it. The color saturation alone was giving Dutch citizens their first dose of serotonin in years. But then something even stranger happened. Some tulips started producing striped petals, fiery patterns, streaks of colors, dramatic contrast. These weren't just flowers anymore. These were art made by nature. The Dutch were painters. They knew a masterpiece when they saw one, and these broken tulips, infected with a mosaic virus no one understood at the time, were the most valuable of all. Imagine paying 6 figures for a flower with a disease. Honestly, it tracks with human behavior. But rarity alone doesn't cause bubbles. Luxury doesn't cause bubbles. What causes bubbles is what luxury does to people. The moment people realized tulips could function as a status symbol, it shifted from, "that's a pretty flower," to, "what will people think of me if I don't have one?" That's the ignition point of every bubble in history, when an object stops being about its value and starts being about your value. And suddenly, merchants want them because rich people have them. Rich people want them because everyone's talking about wanting them. Middle-class craftsmen start thinking, well, maybe if I just buy one, I could flip it and retire. And that's how tulips became Amsterdam's favorite personality trait. Now, here's where things get spicy. You couldn't just walk into a tulip shop and buy a bulb. Tulips only bloom at one time of year, and bulbs are only harvested at one time of year. So most of the buying and selling wasn't based on actual flowers. It was based on promises, contracts, agreements, essentially early futures markets. You were buying the right to buy a tulip later. So imagine a fisherman with calloused hands and a questionable life expectancy sitting in a tavern buying a contract for a flower that no one has seen yet, on the promise that next spring it will be fabulous and make everyone rich. This is the part where modern economists nod solemnly and say, "You see, this is how the derivatives market began." And you and I are just looking around like, is anyone else concerned that a flower is now doing stock market cosplay? And once those contracts start trading, prices begin to move. And once prices begin to move, people begin to talk. Did you hear my neighbor made the equivalent of 40 months' salary flipping a bulb? Yeah, my cousin's husband turned one tulip into a new house. A single flower just sold for more than a master carpenter earns in 10 years. 10 years! Things escalate. People start borrowing money. People start betting everything. People who have never so much as planted a tomato are suddenly calling themselves tulip speculators. You know it's bad when a guy who can't read is lecturing his friends on market fundamentals. And here's the dangerous part. You don't get a bubble because people are dumb. You get a bubble because people are scared to miss out. Tulip Mania wasn't greed. It was anxiety dressed up as opportunity. People felt the world changing around them. Trade was booming. Cities were growing. Wealth was shifting. And for the first time, the average person, a craftsman, a mason, a brewer, could imagine moving up in the world, and tulips looked like a shortcut. This is the heart of the bubble. A door appeared that wasn't there before, and people rushed towards it, hoping it leads to a better life. Spoiler, it does not. But we'll get there. For now, the tulip market is booming. Profits are soaring, everyone feels brilliant, and the only people raising concerns are the ones who already feel left out, which tells you everything about human behavior. Act 3. When the music stops. Here's the thing about bubbles. They never pop because prices get too high. They pop because someone, and we never know who, looks around and realizes, oh, this doesn't make sense. And the second that thought enters the room, even quietly, like a cough in a church, the entire mood changes. It's early February 1637. Winter. Cold. Damp. The kind of cold that makes you question every decision that led you to live in the 1600s. A routine tulip auction takes place in the town of Haarlem. Nothing special. Merchants, traders, craftsmen, all gathered to bid on bulbs they won't see until spring. But that morning, bidders hesitate. Maybe someone has a sick child. Maybe someone's wife asked a pointed question like, "Honey, why is our entire net worth buried in a flower you can't even eat?" Maybe people were just tired. But whatever the reason, when the auctioneer calls the first bid, no one answers, and it hits the room like a dropped glass. Silence, the bad kind. The "no, we're all still holding the bag" kind. All it takes is one failed auction for the collective anxiety to spread faster than the virus that created the fancy tulips in the first place. By the next day, buyers cancel sales. By the next week, contracts fall through. By the end of the month, the entire tulip market collapses, like it was never real in the first place. Which, plot twist, it wasn't. People wake up and what they thought was wealth is gone. Contracts? Worthless. Bulbs? Worth less than onions, literally. Fortunes? Evaporated. A chimney sweep who thought he'd flipped his way into the upper class now owes money he doesn't have to people he doesn't like. A carpenter who thought he secured a future for his family now realizes the tulip rewarding future he imagined is nothing more than a very expensive, very humiliating fever dream. And here's the quiet truth no one tells you when they talk about Tulip Mania. The people hurt the most were the people who could afford it the least. The wealthy? Annoyed, sure, but fine. Merchants? Irritated, but functional. But the working class, the hopeful, the anxious, the "maybe this is my shot" crowd, those were the ones left with debt, shame, and a flower that would be dead in a week. This is always how it goes. Every bubble in history has the same punchline. The people trying to climb the ladder are the ones who fall the hardest. Imagine being a mason who spent the equivalent of half your life savings on a contract for a tulip bulb that will now sell for, I'm not kidding, the price of a ham sandwich. Imagine being a brewer who borrowed money to speculate only to find out the sure thing was as stable as a folding chair missing one leg. Imagine being a widow who traded her family's inherited land for bulbs, told by neighbors it's an investment, you'll be secure for life, then watching everything disappear. When the bubble burst, people weren't just financially ruined, they were embarrassed. The type of embarrassment you feel in your bones. The kind that makes you walk around avoiding eye contact because everyone knows you believed something that turned out to be stupid. And you weren't even chasing greed. You were chasing safety, security, dignity, a chance to feel like the world didn't have to be so hard all the time. Which is exactly why Tulip Mania continues to live in the collective imagination, not because of the money, but because of what it reveals. People don't fall for bubbles because they're irrational. They fall because they're human. We all want a little control, a little hope, a little shortcut, a little relief. And when the world feels unpredictable, unstable, or unfair, something shiny appears and promises this could make it better. Tulip Mania is just the 1600s version of the same emotional storm that drives all financial disasters. A moment where fear puts on a trench coat, calls itself opportunity, and convinces you that taking the risk is not only smart, but necessary. Act 4. The Echo Through Time. If Act 3 was the unraveling, Act 4 is the mirror, because Tulip Mania didn't really end in 1637. We've just been remixing it ever since. Every generation thinks they're smarter than the last. Every retail investor thinks they will time the market. Every society thinks their bubble is different this time. and yet the pattern stays the same. Take your pick. Crypto hustles, NFTs that look like someone's cousin drew them in MS Paint, tech stocks that skyrocketed because someone tweeted AI is the future, influencers selling passive income courses filmed in Airbnbs they don't own. Different century, same psychology. Because humans hate uncertainty. And when the world feels shaky, economically, politically, socially, we cling to anything that gives us the illusion of control. Tulip Mania isn't about tulips. It's about fear wearing ambition as a disguise. It's about the desperation we've all felt, sitting at our kitchen table, looking at our future, thinking, if I could just get one break, maybe everything would finally get better. That's why people fall for bubbles. Not because they're reckless, but because they're tired. Now, here's the dark part that we don't like to admit. Every bubble has winners, but bubbles are structured so that the winners were already winning. The rich in Holland, they had diversified assets, land, ships, political connections. They shrugged and moved on. The working class? They were the ones left holding contracts for flowers worth less than their dinner. Just like today, CEOs survive recessions, hedge funds survive crashes, politicians survive the policies they write. Meanwhile, everyday people get told, maybe next time, you should have been smarter, as if structural inequality is a budgeting problem. The tulip bubble didn't expose stupidity, it exposed vulnerability, and that pattern is the part we never seem to learn from. Here's the twist economists will never tell you. Tulips are still Dutch, the Dutch economy is still thriving, and the only thing that truly collapsed was the delusion. In fact, the biggest long-term consequence of Tulip Mania was a few awkward conversations and some bruised egos. People rebuilt, life moved on, and eventually the tulip became just a flower again. Which leads us to today, to you. Sitting here with your soft coffeehouse music playing under this story, probably thinking, could something like this happen again? And the answer is, of course it will. It already has. It always will. Because as long as humans feel uncertain, there will be a market promising certainty. As long as people feel unseen, there will be a trend promising recognition. As long as people feel behind, there will be a bubble promising a shortcut. That's not cynicism, that's economics. So here's my final thought. The part that's funny, poignant, and a little dark. If history teaches us anything, it's that we will chase the next shiny thing every time. We will convince ourselves we understand risk. We will label hope as strategy. And we will swear that we are not like those people in the past. But give us the right market conditions, the right insecurity, the right promises, whispered at the right moment, and suddenly, we're all one bad decision away from taking out a loan on a flower. Humans don't change, markets don't change, but maybe, if we understand the story, we don't have to repeat it as dramatically. And with that, I'm Heather Shell, and this has been Bear Markets and Bad Decisions, the show where we take history's messiest financial moments, shake them like a cocktail, and drink them so you don't have to. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the world's most dramatic gardening accident, do me a favor, follow, subscribe, or whatever button your platform is begging you to press. It costs less than a tulip bulb in 1636, and unlike that investment, this one actually pays off. And remember, in a world full of bubbles, just waiting for the wrong breeze, don't bet your financial future on a flower, a fad, or a guy named Jan from the 1600s promising you guaranteed returns. Thank you for listening, thank you for learning. Until next week, I'm Heather Shell, reminding you that wealth is built on patience, not petals.